on the helplessness of not being understood. Not being understood is the longest lasting existential pain of a person. The echo of not being understood, especially misunderstanding, depresses a person the most. Not being understood by people is like being thirsty in a desert. When people are not understood, they live like an exile, not with their words but their souls. Not being understood is a person being imprisoned in their inner world, being squeezed between the walls that narrow inside. When people feel they are not understood, they become alienated from others and themselves. In such cases, a person wants someone to understand them, to touch their words and their silences. In the case of not being understood, the pains hidden in the dark corners of the human soul come to the surface. Being understood allows one to reach the depths of another heart beyond speaking. However, a person is left with a frightening feeling of loneliness, not when they are not understood, but when they give up waiting to be understood. Sometimes understanding a person can be more valuable than loving them. Understanding is an ability to show empathy and forgiveness beyond love. When you love someone you don't understand, love often remains an illusion. Gaston Bachelard's words, "Understanding is discovering the world inside the other person," emphasize the empathy at the root of the effort to understand. Forgiving someone begins with trying to understand why they made that mistake rather than accepting their mistake. Feelings of love and trust are the cornerstones of human existence, but too much of it can become a burden that wears down a person's soul. It creates a sense of surrender in a person. People need to be understood the most during loving and trusting. As Kierkegaard put it, love remains pure as long as it is reciprocated. Perhaps that is why separation is a situation where both the one who leaves and the one who stays are right. Sometimes being understood by someone can be more valuable than being loved by them. Understanding contains an empathy that transcends love. When a person loves someone they don't yet know well enough, who they don't understand, they are following a shadow rather than love. Understanding is a journey, and love is the first step of this journey. There is a strange kind of loneliness experienced among crowds from the pain of not being understood. Standing in front of someone else, opening the heart, revealing the dark chambers of the soul, and only encountering incomprehensibility gives a person more pain than loneliness can. The silence between words is like the gap between souls that cannot be bridged. Jung says, "Loneliness does not come from being alone. It comes from not being able to communicate what seems important." In the failure of understanding, we find ourselves unheard and unseen, as if our existence has diminished or our essence has disappeared in the other party's person. In speaking but not being understood, one feels the weight of invisibility. One feels helpless, as if the world is looking at him but not seeing him. The pain of not being understood is not the pain of rejection, but the pain of alienation. As if we were wandering in a desert, shouting in a vast space, we hear only the echo of our voices. In times of loneliness, we extend our thoughts and feelings in the hope of connection, but these always remain unanswered and echo in a deep void. Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does, says Sartre. However, in this freedom, there is a risk of not being recognized. Man is tested by incomprehension because he cannot carry a greater responsibility than the burden of his uniqueness, the weight of his characteristics. The helplessness of incomprehension emerges when he realizes that what makes man different is also what makes him unknown. Being misunderstood pushes a person into their loneliness. In the most vulnerable moments, a person faces the risk of revealing their true self when they realize they are not known and their voice is not heard. They are left alone with the pain of not being understood. A person experiences the pain of not being understood, not in the words spoken, but in the unspoken, when they cannot establish heart and mind contact with someone. Let's think of Wittgenstein's words, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." How can a person stay within the same limits as someone who knows the universe but does not know their neighborhood or themselves? What else can a person with a vast world of perception expect other than the desperation of not being understood? The fear of being misunderstood in a person causes more incredible pain when they feel that the spoken language is not sufficient and that putting feelings into words is flawed and incomplete. While people struggle to have a place with others, they realize that no words are powerful enough to express emotions. In this state of awareness, a person begins to experience the gap deeply, the incomprehensibility between what they feel and what they express. There is a feeling of isolation that comes from not being understood. This is a feeling that disconnects a person from the existence of others. The anxiety of not being understood is a feeling that isolates a person from everything and leaves them alone with 8 billion people. Rudyard Kipling describes this situation. We are all islands shouting lies to each other in a sea of misunderstanding. A person may share the same space with someone and breathe the same air, but when their inner world cannot establish a partnership with the other, they become lonely. This is the reality of people's disconnection from each other and not being understood enough. The desire to be known and understood is at the core of human existence. This is the desire to be understood and for the self to be recognized. When people are not understood, they feel like they are standing on the opposite bank of a river. On that opposite bank, a person watches the currents of misunderstanding between themselves and the other. In this case, no bridge can bridge this distance. A heart that yearns to be recognized and noticed remains alone in its desires, fears, and longings. When Dostoevsky said, "To be loved is to be understood," he meant to explain that the desire to be understood stems from a person's need for love. Here lies the deep connection between love and the desire to be understood. How can one love someone one cannot fully comprehend? How can one connect to another without comprehending and understanding the depths of their existence? At the core of the state of not being understood lies the desperation of a person to not be able to establish deep relationships with others. In depthless relationships that cause not being understood, approximate guesses, half-truths, and meaningless assumptions play a role. The pain of not being understood is the effect of lives reduced to a caricature, of being known only in fragments, of not being able to discover who a person is. The pain of not being understood often stems from the fear of being misinterpreted. Misunderstanding is not only caused by being ignored, but also by being seen as wrong, by intentions and thoughts being distorted and rendered unrecognizable. The distortion of the self and the disregard for the valued truth play a significant role in this. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, "People see only what they are prepared to see." The truth of this saying is more evident when words are taken out of context and actions are distorted by the lens of others' prejudices. Montaigne says, "I am not who you think I am. I am who I know myself to be." Even if the whole world does not understand, in the event of not being understood, it is essential for a person not to deny themselves and to maintain their self-respect to protect their self. In time, not being understood leaves a person face to face that they need to understand themselves more deeply. When people are not accepted from the outside, they must turn inward and face their truth.